The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in April 1867, and when Delilah Morgan read that her father had died somewhere in the Colorado mountains, the tears came so fast and hard that she could barely breathe through the sobs that racked her small frame in the middle of the general store where she worked. Mrs. Henderson, the store owner, clicked her tongue disapprovingly and told her she cried too easy, that she needed to toughen up if she was going to survive in Oregon City, Oregon, where the world did not stop for anyone's grief. But Delilah could not help it. Her father had been all she had left after her mother died of fever 3 years ago, and now she was utterly alone in a town that had never quite accepted her tender heart in quick tears. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, apologized to Mrs. Henderson, and walked out into the spring sunshine that seemed too bright for such a dark day. Oregon City sat along the Willamette River, a bustling place full of lumber mills and ambitious men who had come west seeking fortune. Delilah had arrived here with her father 5 years ago when she was 18, hoping to start fresh after losing everything they had back in Missouri. Her father had found work at one of the mills, and she had taken the job at Henderson's general store to help make ends meet. But then her father got the gold fever, like so many men did, and he headed east into the mountains with a group of prospectors, promising to return wealthy enough to give her the life she deserved. That had been 8 months ago, and now this letter from a stranger named Samuel Burke told her that her father had died in a rock slide near a place called Granite Creek, and that his few possessions were being held at a trading post 200 miles away if she wanted to claim them. She walked back to the tiny room she rented above the bakery, her vision blurred with tears that would not stop flowing. The baker's wife, Mrs. Chen, saw her on the stairs and made the same comment everyone always made. "You cry too easy, girl. Life is hard. You have to be harder." Delilah nodded and continued to her room, where she sat on the edge of her narrow bed and let herself weep until there were no more tears left. When the sun began to set, she made a decision. She would go to Granite Creek and collect her father's belongings. It was all she had left of him, and she would not let his memory disappear into the wilderness without at least trying to bring something home. The next morning she asked Mrs. Henderson for time off work. The older woman was not pleased, but she agreed to let Delilah go for 2 weeks, warning her that if she was not back by then, she should not bother coming back at all. Delilah packed her few belongings into a carpet bag, counted her small savings, and went to the livery stable to inquire about traveling to Granite Creek. The stableman, a gruff fellow named Joe, laughed outright when she told him where she wanted to go. "Granite Creek? That is wild country. Miss, you cannot get there by stage. You would need to ride, and even then you would need a guide. A woman alone would not last a day out there." He shook his head and turned away, dismissing her as foolish, but Delilah was not easily discouraged. She spent the rest of the day asking around town, and by evening she had learned that there was a man who lived in the mountains east of Oregon City, a trapper and hunter who sometimes guided people into the back country. His name was Finn Crawford, and people spoke of him in hushed tones, half admiring and half fearful. They said he was more bear than man, standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders like an ox and arms thick with muscle from years of living rough in the wilderness. They said he had long dark hair that he wore tied back, and a beard that covered half his face. They said he did not talk much, did not smile often, and did not suffer fools. But they also said that if you needed to get somewhere dangerous, he was the man who could get you there and back alive. Delilah asked where she could find him, and an old trapper named Pete told her that Finn came into town once a month to trade his furs and buy supplies, and that he was due any day now. So she waited, spending her savings carefully on food and boarding, and 3 days later, Pete found her at the boarding house and told her that Finn Crawford was at the trading post down by the river. She hurried there, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and nervousness. The trading post was a rough log building that smelled of tobacco, leather, and animal pelts. Inside, several men stood around talking and drinking, but Delilah's eyes went immediately to the man standing at the counter. He was exactly as people had described, perhaps even more imposing in person. Finn Crawford stood at least 6 feet 4 inches tall, with a frame so powerfully built that he made the other men in the room look small. His shoulders were broad and heavily muscled beneath a worn buckskin shirt, and his arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled up, were corded with strength. His hair was dark brown, nearly black, and hung past his shoulders with a few strands tied back from his face. His beard was thick and well kept, and his eyes, when he glanced up at the sound of the door opening, were a startling shade of blue, clear and sharp as a winter sky. Delilah felt suddenly very small and very foolish standing there in her plain brown dress and worn shawl, but she forced herself to walk forward. The conversations in the room died down as the men noticed her, and she felt their curious stares. She stopped a few feet from the counter and cleared her throat. "Excuse me, are you Finn Crawford?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended, but at least it did not shake. The big man turned fully to look at her, his eyes moving over her in a quick assessment. I am, he said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together, but not unkind. What do you want? Delilah took a breath. I need a guide to take me to Granite Creek. I was told you might be willing to help. There was a moment of silence, and then one of the other men laughed. Granite Creek? That is 2 weeks hard riding, Crawford. You going to babysit a little lady all the way out there? Finn ignored the comment, his eyes still on Delilah. Why do you want to go to Granite Creek? My father died there. I need to collect his belongings. She felt the tears starting again, burning at the back of her eyes, and she blinked hard to keep them at bay. She would not cry in front of these rough men. She would not. But despite her efforts, one tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed, and saw Finn's expression shift slightly, something softening in those hard blue eyes. I can pay, she added quickly. Not much, but I have some money saved. Finn was quiet for a long moment, and Delilah was sure he was going to refuse, but then he nodded slowly. I will take you. We leave tomorrow at dawn. Bring only what you can carry in a pack and wear sturdy clothes. It is rough country and we will be riding hard. Relief flooded through her so intensely that she felt her knees go weak. Thank you. Thank you so much. He nodded again, then turned back to his trading. The conversation in the room resumed, and Delilah left quickly, her heart racing. She had done it. She was going to Granite Creek. The next morning she met Finn at the livery stable just as the sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. She had followed his instructions, packing only essentials into a canvas pack and wearing her most practical dress, along with a pair of her father's old boots that were too big but would have to do. Finn was already there, checking the straps on 2 horses, a large black gelding that looked as strong as its owner, and a smaller chestnut mare that seemed calm and steady. He glanced at her pack and nodded approval. You ride? Yes, sir. My father taught me when I was young. Good. We have a long way to go, and I do not want to have to lead you the whole way. He handed her the reins to the chestnut mare. Her name is Rosie. She is gentle but strong. Treat her well, and she will get you where you need to go. Delilah took the reins and stroked Rosie's soft nose, feeling a connection with the mare immediately. Finn helped her tie her pack to the saddle, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he secured the straps, and then they mounted and rode out of Oregon City as the town was just beginning to wake. The first few hours of riding were quiet. Finn led the way and Delilah followed, trying to keep up with his steady pace. He did not talk, and she was too nervous to break the silence, so she focused on staying in the saddle and watching the country change around them. They followed the river east for a while, then turned into the foothills where the trees grew thick and the air smelled of pine and earth. By midday, Delilah's legs were aching, and she was grateful when Finn finally stopped near a small creek to rest the horses and eat. He pulled some dried meat and hard biscuits from his pack and handed her a portion without a word. She ate gratefully, washing it down with cold water from the creek. Finn stood a few feet away, scanning the forest around them with those sharp blue eyes, always alert. How long will it take to reach Granite Creek? Delilah asked, finally breaking the silence. 10 days if the weather holds and we do not run into trouble, Finn replied. 12 if we do. What kind of trouble? He glanced at her. Bandits sometimes. Wild animals. Bad weather. The mountains do not care about your plans, Miss Morgan. They will do what they want. She nodded, feeling a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. But she had come this far and she would not turn back now. I appreciate you taking me. I know it is not convenient. Finn was quiet for a moment, then he said, I knew your father. Delilah's eyes widened. You did? Met him last fall when his group passed through the territory where I was trapping. He was a good man. Talked about you often. Said he had a daughter waiting for him in Oregon City, and he was going to strike it rich so he could give you a better life. Finn's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his voice that suggested sympathy. I am sorry for your loss. The tears came again, sudden and overwhelming. Delilah covered her face with her hands, trying to muffle the sobs, but they came anyway, shaking her shoulders. She heard Finn move closer, and then his hand, large and warm, rested gently on her shoulder. It is all right, he said quietly. Cry if you need to. Everyone says I cry too easy. Delilah managed between sobs. They say I need to toughen up. Finn was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it yet. Good. Means your heart is still tender and true. The world has not hardened you yet, and that is a rare thing. Do not let anyone take that from you. His words broke something open in her chest, and she cried harder, not from sadness now, but from relief that someone finally understood. When the tears finally subsided, she looked up at Finn and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something between kindness and pain. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded and stepped back. We should keep moving. We have a lot of ground to cover before nightfall. They rode through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains. The terrain grew rougher, the trails narrower, and Delilah had to focus all her attention on guiding Rosie over the rocky ground. Finn moved ahead with the ease of someone who had spent his entire life in the wilderness, his body swaying naturally with his horse's movements, his eyes constantly scanning the path ahead. As the sun began to set, Finn led them to a small clearing beside a stream where the ground was level enough to make camp. He helped Delilah dismount, and she nearly collapsed when her feet hit the ground, her legs trembling from hours in the saddle. Finn steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his grip firm but gentle. "You did well today," he said. "It will get easier." She nodded, too tired to speak, and watched as Finn efficiently set up camp. He built a fire, tended to the horses, and heated water for coffee with movements that spoke of years of practice. Delilah tried to help, but he waved her away, telling her to rest. She sat on a fallen log and watched him work, studying the way the firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the concentration in his eyes. When the coffee was ready, he poured her a cup and handed it to her along with more dried meat and biscuits. She ate slowly, her appetite returning as she warmed by the fire. Finn sat across from her, his own cup in his hands, and for a while they just sat in comfortable silence. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" Delilah asked eventually. "Most of my life. Came out here when I was 16, so about 12 years now." He stared into the fire as he spoke. "My family had a farm in Pennsylvania, but I never took to farming. I wanted space and freedom, so I headed west and never looked back." "Do you miss your family sometimes?" "But this is where I belong." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brought you to Oregon City?" "My father wanted a fresh start after my mother died. He heard there was work in the mills, and he thought the change would be good for us." She smiled sadly. "It was for a while, but then he got the gold fever, and I could not talk him out of going. Gold does that to men, makes them forget everything else." Finn's voice was neutral, but she sensed disapproval beneath it. "Did you ever look for gold?" "No, I have everything I need in the mountains. I trap, I hunt, I trade my furs for supplies, and I am free. That is worth more to me than gold." Delilah found herself envying that freedom, that certainty. She had never felt certain about anything in her life, always drifting from one situation to the next, trying to make the best of whatever came her way. But Finn seemed rooted in who he was, solid and unshakable. As the night grew colder, Finn spread out blankets for sleeping, placing hers near the fire and his own a few feet away, positioned between her and the dark forest beyond. She understood without him saying it that he was protecting her, putting himself between her and any danger that might come in the night. The thought made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in years. She lay down and pulled the blanket up to her chin, staring at the stars visible through the trees. The sounds of the forest surrounded her, strange and a little frightening, but Finn's steady breathing nearby calmed her nerves. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. The next 9 days followed a similar pattern. They woke at dawn, rode until midday, rested briefly, then rode until evening when Finn would find a place to camp. The journey was hard, harder than Delilah had anticipated, and there were moments when she wondered if she would make it. Her body ached constantly, her muscles protesting every movement, but she gritted her teeth and kept going, determined not to slow Finn down. He was patient with her, she realized. When she struggled on particularly rough sections of trail, he would slow his pace without making a fuss about it. When she needed to rest, he would find reasons to stop that made it seem like it was his idea, not hers. And in the evenings, he would make sure she ate enough and stayed warm, checking on her in small ways that showed he cared, even if he did not say it out loud. They talked more as the days passed, the silence between them gradually filling with conversation. Finn told her about the mountains, pointing out animal tracks and teaching her which plants were safe to eat. He told her about the winters, when the snow piled so high that a man could disappear beneath it, and about the summers, when the wildflowers bloomed so thick that the meadows looked like paintings. He spoke of the elk and deer, the bears and mountain lions, and how to survive among them. Delilah told him about her life in Oregon City, about working in the general store and the small kindnesses and larger cruelties of the people there. She told him about her mother, who had been gentle and kind, and her father who had loved them both fiercely, but had never quite managed to hold on to anything. And she found herself telling him things she had never told anyone else, about her fears and hopes and the loneliness that had settled over her like a heavy cloak since her father left. Finn listened to everything she said, really listened, and she could see him thinking about her words, considering them carefully before he responded. He never dismissed her feelings or told her she was wrong to feel the way she did. Instead, he would nod and say things like, "That must have been hard," or "You are stronger than you think." His words were simple, but they meant everything to her. On the 5th day, they were crossing a rocky slope when Delilah's horse stumbled. She grabbed for the saddle horn, but the sudden movement threw her off balance, and she fell, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through her shoulder and hip, and for a moment she could not breathe. Finn was off his horse and beside her in an instant, his hands moving over her carefully, checking for injuries. "Where does it hurt?" "Everywhere," she gasped, trying to sit up. "Stay still." His voice was calm but firm. He checked her arms and legs, then gently prodded her shoulder. She winced and he frowned. "Nothing broken, but you are going to have some impressive bruises. Can you stand?" With his help she got to her feet, testing her weight gingerly. Everything hurt, but she could move. Rosie stood a few feet away, looking guilty, and Delilah reached out to stroke her nose. "It is all right, girl. It was not your fault." Finn helped her back into the saddle and they continued, but he kept glancing back at her, watching to make sure she was all right. That night he insisted she take extra time to rest, and he heated water so she could wash the dirt from her scrapes and bruises. His gentleness surprised her, the way such a large, powerful man could be so careful with her. "You are taking good care of me," she said as he handed her a cup of hot tea he had brewed from some leaves he gathered. "You are my responsibility until I get you back to Oregon City," he replied, but there was warmth in his voice that belied the practical words. "Is that all I am, a responsibility?" She had not meant to ask, but the question slipped out before she could stop it. Finn looked at her for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "No," he said finally. "You are more than that." Her heart skipped a beat. "What am I then?" He seemed to struggle for words, his jaw working. "You are someone I do not want to see hurt," he said at last. "Someone I want to protect." It was not a declaration of love, but coming from a man like Finn, it felt like one. Delilah felt warmth spread through her chest, something bright and hopeful taking root. The next morning she woke to find Finn already up, standing at the edge of the clearing and staring into the forest. She joined him and he pointed to tracks in the soft earth near the stream. "Bear," he said quietly. "Came through last night after we were asleep. Big one." Delilah felt a chill run down her spine. Why did it not bother us? The fire kept it away, and maybe it was not hungry. He glanced at her. "But we need to be careful. A bear that close means we are in its territory." They broke camp quickly and rode on, and Delilah found herself staying closer to Finn than usual, her nerves on edge. But the day passed without incident, and by evening, her fear had faded back into the general anxiety of being in the wilderness. That night, as they sat by the fire, Finn asked her something he had not asked before. "What will you do after you collect your father's belongings? Will you stay in Oregon City?" Delilah had been wondering the same thing herself. "I do not know. There is not much keeping me there. Mrs. Henderson barely tolerates me, and I have no family, no real friends. But I do not have anywhere else to go either." Finn was quiet, his eyes on the fire. "You could stay in the mountains." "What do you mean?" He looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression, something that looked like hope. "I have a cabin about 20 miles from Granite Creek. It is simple, but it is warm and dry, and there is plenty of game and fresh water. A person could make a good life there if they wanted to." Her heart began to race. "Are you asking me to stay with you?" "I am saying you have options. You do not have to go back to a place where people do not appreciate you." He paused, then added more softly, "I would like it if you stayed, but it is your choice." Delilah felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of something that felt like joy. "I would like that too, but I do not want to be a burden to you." "You are not a burden." His voice was firm. "You are brave and strong, and you have a good heart. Those are rare qualities, Delilah. I would be honored to have you stay." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and they sat like that for a long time, not speaking but saying everything that mattered. On the 10th day they arrived at Granite Creek. It was less a town and more a collection of rough cabins and tents clustered around a creek that ran cold and fast with snowmelt. Finn led them to the trading post, a sturdy log building that served as the center of the small community. Inside, a man with a weathered face and graying hair looked up from the counter. "Finn Crawford. Been a while," the man said. Then his eyes moved to Delilah. "And you must be Morgan's daughter. I am Samuel Burke. I sent you the letter." Delilah nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you for writing to me." Samuel reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small wooden box and a worn leather satchel. "These were your father's things." "Not much, I am afraid. The rock slide took most everything else." Delilah took the box and satchel with trembling hands. Inside the box were a few personal items: her father's pocket watch, a photograph of her mother, and a small bag of gold dust. The satchel held some clothes and a journal. She opened the journal and saw her father's handwriting, and the tears came again, flowing freely down her cheeks. Finn's hand settled on her shoulder, steadying her. Samuel looked uncomfortable with her tears, but he did not say anything unkind. He just nodded and said, "Your father was a good man. I am sorry he did not make it back to you." "Thank you," Delilah managed. She clutched the box and satchel to her chest, feeling the weight of them, the weight of her father's lost dreams. They left the trading post, and Finn led her to a quiet spot by the creek where she could sit and look through her father's things in private. She read his journal, the entries detailing his journey into the mountains, his hopes for striking gold, and his constant thoughts of her. On the last page he had written, "I will make Delilah proud. I will give her the life she deserves." She cried until she had no tears left, and Finn sat beside her the whole time, his presence solid and comforting. When she finally composed herself, she looked at him and said, "He never found much gold, did he?" "No. But he found something worth more. He found friendship and purpose out here, even if it was only for a short time. And he never stopped thinking of you." Finn gestured to the journal. "That is a father's love right there. It does not need gold to prove itself." Delilah nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. Her father had loved her, and that was enough. She carefully packed his belongings back into the satchel, knowing she would treasure them always. They spent the night at Granite Creek, and the next morning Finn asked her, "Are you ready to see the cabin?" She smiled. "Yes, I am ready." They rode north and west, following trails that only Finn seemed to know existed. The mountains rose around them, majestic and wild, and Delilah felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. This was not the cramped, judgmental world of Oregon City. This was open space and endless sky, and she could breathe here. After several hours, Finn led them into a valley where a stream wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers. At the far end of the valley, nestled against the forest, stood a cabin made of logs, smoke curling from the chimney. Wait, no, there was no smoke. The cabin was empty, waiting. Finn stopped his horse and looked at her. "This is it. This is home." Delilah slid from her saddle and walked toward the cabin, her heart full. It was beautiful in its simplicity. Exactly the kind of place where she could imagine building a life. She turned to Finn, who had dismounted and was watching her with an expression that was both hopeful and nervous. "It is perfect," she said. His face broke into a smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his rugged features into something breathtaking. He walked to her, closing the distance between them, and took both her hands in his. "I know we have only known each other for 10 days, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I feel like I have been waiting for you my whole life. I do not have fancy words or grand gestures, but I can promise you this. I will protect you, provide for you, and care for you for as long as I live. And I will never ever tell you that you cry too easy." Delilah laughed through the tears that were of course already streaming down her face. "I think I am falling in love with you, Finn Crawford." "I know I am falling in love with you, Delilah Morgan." He pulled her close, wrapping his strong arms around her, and she felt safer and more cherished than she ever had in her life. He kissed her then, a gentle kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate, and Delilah felt her entire world shift and realign around this man, this moment, this place. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "Will you stay?" he whispered. "Will you make a life with me here?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will stay." Over the following weeks, Delilah settled into life in the mountains. The cabin was indeed simple, just 2 rooms, but it was sturdy and well built, and Finn had stocked it with everything necessary for survival. He showed her how to fish in the stream, how to preserve meat, how to recognize the signs of changing weather. She proved to be a quick learner, and more than that, she proved to be resilient in ways she had not known she possessed. She cleaned and organized the cabin, adding small touches that made it feel more like a home. She found wildflowers and put them in jars on the table. She sewed curtains from fabric Finn traded for at a distant settlement. She cooked meals that were simple but hearty, and every evening, Finn would come in from whatever work he had been doing and look around the cabin with wonder, as if he could not quite believe it was real. They grew closer each day, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Finn was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He would bring her fresh game and fish, would fix anything that needed repairing, would sit with her in the evenings and listen as she read aloud from the books he had collected over the years. And when she cried, which she still did easily over small hurts and large sorrows alike, he would hold her and remind her that her tender heart was a gift, not a weakness. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Finn turned to her and said, "I want to marry you, Delilah. I want you to be my wife in every way. Will you have me?" She looked at him, at this strong, gentle man who had given her a home and a future when she had neither, and she felt her heart swell with love so intense it almost hurt. "Yes, Finn, I will marry you." There was no preacher in the mountains, but there was an old trapper named Jacob who lived about 15 miles away and who had in his younger days served as a circuit preacher. Finn rode to fetch him, and a week later Jacob arrived at the cabin with his wife, a tiny woman named Mary who hugged Delilah like a long-lost daughter. They held the wedding in the meadow near the cabin, with wildflowers all around and the mountains as witnesses. Delilah wore a simple white dress that Mary had helped her make from fabric Finn traded for, and Finn wore his best buckskin shirt and pants, his hair neatly tied back, his beard trimmed. He looked so handsome that Delilah had to blink back tears just looking at him. Jacob spoke the words of the ceremony, his voice strong and sure, and when it came time for vows, Finn took Delilah's hands and said, "I promise to love you, protect you, and honor you all the days of my life. You are my heart, Delilah, and I will spend every day trying to be worthy of yours." Delilah's voice shook as she replied, "I promise to love you, stand by you, and cherish you all the days of my life. You have given me a home and a future, Finn, and I will spend every day making sure you know how much that means to me." Jacob pronounced them husband and wife, and Finn kissed her with such tenderness and passion that Delilah forgot there were other people present. When they finally broke apart, Jacob and Mary were grinning, and Mary was wiping tears from her eyes. They shared a meal together, and Jacob and Mary stayed the night before heading back to their own cabin the next morning. When they were gone, Delilah and Finn were finally alone as husband and wife. Finn carried her over the threshold of the cabin, and they spent their first night together discovering each other in the way that married people do, with gentleness and passion and a love that felt like it would burn forever. The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Delilah learned to love the rhythms of mountain life, the hard work and simple pleasures. She tended a small garden Finn helped her plant, grew skilled at drying herbs and preserving food, and even learned to shoot a rifle with reasonable accuracy. Finn taught her everything with patience and pride, clearly delighted at how well she adapted to their life. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk about their dreams. Delilah spoke of wanting children someday, of raising a family in this beautiful valley. Finn's eyes would light up at the thought, and he would pull her close and tell her he could not imagine anything more perfect than a house full of children with her eyes and tender heart. As summer turned to autumn, the mountains exploded with color, the aspens turning gold and the maples red. Finn took Delilah on long rides through the high country, showing her hidden lakes and secret meadows, and she fell more in love with both the land and the man every day. In October, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be sure before she told Finn. When she finally shared the news, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy, picked her up and spun her around, then very carefully set her down and immediately started fussing over her, asking if she was feeling all right, if she needed anything, if she should be resting more. She laughed and told him she was fine, that she was strong and healthy, and that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. But his protective nature only intensified, and over the following months he treated her like she was made of glass, always hovering, always worried. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in late October and not stopping until the mountains were blanketed in white. Finn had prepared well, though, and the cabin was warm and well stocked. They spent the long winter evenings together, Finn carving wooden toys for the baby while Delilah sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric. They talked about names, debating boys' names and girls' names, trying to find the perfect one. Delilah's belly grew round and large, and Finn would often place his hand on it, feeling the baby move, his face filled with such wonder and love that it made Delilah cry. Happy tears, always happy tears now. In late March, as the snow was finally beginning to melt, Delilah went into labor. Finn had ridden to fetch Mary weeks earlier, and the older woman had agreed to stay with them until the baby came. Mary proved to be a calm and capable midwife, guiding Delilah through the long hours of labor with steady encouragement. Finn paced outside the cabin, too anxious to sit still, and Delilah could hear his boots crunching in the snow as he walked back and forth. When the baby finally arrived, a lusty, wailing boy with dark hair like his father, Mary cleaned him up and wrapped him in a soft blanket before calling Finn inside. Finn came in looking terrified, his eyes going immediately to Delilah. "Are you all right?" "I am perfect," she said, exhausted but glowing. "Come meet your son." He approached slowly, almost reverently, and when Mary placed the baby in his arms, his face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he looked down at the tiny life he held, and Delilah realized it was the first time she had ever seen him cry. "He is perfect," Finn whispered. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after Finn's father, and he became the center of their world. Finn was a devoted father, taking to the role as naturally as he did everything else. He would rock Thomas for hours, sing to him in a surprisingly gentle voice, and change his diapers without complaint. Delilah watched him with their son and fell even more in love, if such a thing were possible. As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, he proved to have his mother's tender heart and his father's strength. He cried easily at small hurts and injustices, and Finn would scoop him up and tell him the same thing he had told Delilah all those years ago. "It is all right to cry, son. It means your heart is still tender and true. Do not let the world harden you." When Thomas was 2 years old, Delilah became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after the horse that had carried Delilah safely through the mountains to find her new life. Rose had her mother's soft features and her father's blue eyes, and she wrapped Finn around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. Thomas grew into a strong, kind boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Rose proved to be as tender-hearted as her mother, crying over injured birds and wounded animals, and Finn would comfort her and teach her how to help them heal. 2 more children followed, another son named Henry and a daughter named Grace, and the cabin rang with the sounds of laughter and play. Delilah and Finn built a life that was simple but rich in all the ways that mattered. They had love and family, purpose and freedom. They faced challenges, of course, harsh winters and lean times, injuries and illnesses, but they faced them together, and that made all the difference. As the children grew older, Delilah would sometimes think back to that day in Oregon City when she had received the letter about her father's death, when she had cried in the general store and been told she cried too easy. She thought about how lost and alone she had felt, how uncertain her future had seemed. And then she would look at Finn, still strong and protective after all these years, at their children running through the meadow, at the life they had built together, and she would cry again. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears for all the blessings she had received. And Finn would see her crying and come to her, pulling her into his arms, and say what he always said: "I love that you cry easily. It means your heart is still tender and true, and I would not change that for anything in the world." One evening in late summer, when Thomas was 15 and Rose was 13, Henry 11 and Grace 9, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Finn had his arm around Delilah, and she leaned against his broad shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the safety and love that had never wavered. Thomas, who was already showing signs of growing into a man as tall and strong as his father, looked over at them and asked, "Pa, how did you know Ma was the right one for you?" Finn glanced down at Delilah, and she saw the love in his eyes, as bright and true as it had been the day they met. "I knew because she saw me, really saw me, not just the rough mountain man everyone else saw. And I saw her, not the woman everyone said cried too easy, but the woman with the bravest, most tender heart I had ever known. When you find someone who sees you and loves you for exactly who you are, son, you hold on tight and never let go." Delilah felt the familiar sting of tears and did not try to stop them. Finn smiled and kissed the top of her head, and their children, used to their mother's easy tears, smiled too. They had grown up knowing that tears were not weakness but a sign of a heart that felt deeply, and they had learned to value that. As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Delilah felt a profound sense of peace. She thought of her father, buried somewhere in these mountains he had loved, and she hoped he could see her now, see the life she had built, the family she had created. She hoped he knew she had found her place in the world, and that it was more beautiful than anything he could have bought with gold. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Thomas grew into a fine young man and eventually married a young woman from one of the distant settlements, bringing her to live nearby. Rose, too, found love, though hers was with a gentleman who worked as a teacher in a small town 50 miles away. She moved there but visited often, always bringing her own growing family to see Grandma and Grandpa. Henry followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a mountain man himself, while Grace surprised everyone by becoming a skilled healer, learning from Mary, and then traveling to larger towns to study proper medicine before returning to the mountains to serve the scattered communities there. Through it all, Finn and Delilah remained the center, the foundation upon which their family was built. Their love never dimmed, never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experience and mutual respect. Finn's hair turned gray, and his beard went white, but he remained strong and vital, still trapping and hunting, still providing for his family. Delilah's face gained lines and her hair silver streaks, but she remained beautiful in Finn's eyes, her heart as tender and true as the day he had met her. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Finn took Delilah back to the meadow where they had been married. Their children had arranged everything, setting up a picnic with all of Delilah's favorite foods, decorating the space with wildflowers. The whole family was there, children and grandchildren, and they spent the day celebrating the love that had started it all. As evening fell and the others drifted away to give them privacy, Finn and Delilah stood together in the meadow, his arms around her, her head on his chest. They did not need to speak. Everything that mattered had already been said 1,000 times in 1,000 ways. But Finn said it anyway, because some words never got old. "I love you, Delilah Crawford. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face as they always did when her emotions ran high. "I love you too, Finn. You saved me, gave me a home and a life I never dreamed possible. I am so grateful for you." He wiped her tears gently with his thumb and smiled. "Good. Means your heart is still tender and true." She laughed and cried harder, and he held her until the tears subsided. Then they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the mountains rising around them, the stars beginning to appear overhead, and the sound of their family's laughter echoing across the valley. 20 more years passed, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Finn's body finally began to show its age, his movements slower, his strength diminished though never gone entirely. Delilah developed a cough one winter that lingered, worrying everyone, but she recovered with Grace's skilled care. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by what seemed like half the mountain territory. Their cabin had long since been expanded to accommodate their large family when they visited, and the meadow was filled with tents and wagons and the happy chaos of a clan gathering. Thomas, now a father and grandfather himself, stood to make a speech. "My parents taught us many things," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "They taught us to work hard, to respect the land, to value family, but most of all they taught us about love. Real love, the kind that endures through hardship and grows stronger with time. The kind that sees another person fully and loves them completely. Pa always told us that Ma's tender heart was her greatest strength, and he was right. Her compassion, her empathy, her capacity to feel deeply, those are the qualities that made this family what it is. And Pa's strength and protection, his unwavering devotion, that is what gave us all the security to become who we are. They are living proof that true love exists, and we are all the beneficiaries of that love." Delilah cried through the entire speech naturally, and Finn held her hand, his own eyes damp. When Thomas finished, everyone cheered, and then the music started, and there was dancing and laughter long into the night. As Delilah and Finn sat together watching their family celebrate, she said quietly, "Did you ever imagine, back when you agreed to guide a crying girl through the mountains, that this would be your life?" Finn thought about it, then shook his head. "No, I imagined living alone, trapping and hunting, living free. I never imagined love or family or any of this. But I am so glad I was wrong. This is so much better than anything I could have imagined." "Me too," Delilah said softly. "When Mrs. Henderson told me I cried too easy, I felt ashamed. Like there was something wrong with me. But you saw it differently. You saw my tears as evidence of a feeling heart, not a weak one. You changed everything for me, Finn. You changed everything for me too, Delilah. You taught me that strength is not just about physical power or surviving alone in the wilderness. Real strength is in opening your heart, in letting yourself love and be loved, in building something lasting with another person. You taught me that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their great-grandchildren run and play in the gathering dusk. Then Delilah said, "I am tired, Finn. I think I would like to go inside and rest." He helped her to her feet, and they walked slowly to the cabin, his arm around her waist, supporting her. Inside, he helped her into bed and lay down beside her, pulling her close. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the sounds of their families celebrating outside fading into dreams. Delilah died peacefully in her sleep that night, her heart simply stopping, worn out from a long life fully lived. Finn woke at dawn and knew immediately that she was gone. He held her for a long time, tears streaming down his face, his heart breaking in a way he had never experienced before. But even through the grief, he felt grateful. Grateful for every day they had shared, every moment of love and laughter, every tear and triumph. The family gathered around, their grief profound, but their gratitude even more so. They had been given a gift in watching Finn and Delilah's love story unfold over 4 decades. They had seen what real love looked like, and it had shaped them all. They buried Delilah in the meadow where she and Finn had been married, under the shadow of the mountains she had come to love. Finn stood at the graveside, his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren around him, and he said simply, "She had the tenderest, truest heart I ever knew. She cried easily because she felt deeply, and that was never a weakness. It was her greatest strength. I loved her from the moment I met her until the moment she left me, and I will love her until I join her." Finn lived for 2 more years, staying in the cabin they had shared, tending her grave and spending time with his family. He never remarried, never even considered it. Delilah had been his one true love, and he was content to live out his remaining days remembering her and preparing to join her. On a bright morning in early summer, with the wildflowers blooming and the mountains green and alive, Finn went to Delilah's grave as he did every day. He sat beside it, talking to her the way he always did, telling her about the family, about the beauty of the morning, about how much he missed her. Thomas found him there an hour later, sitting peacefully against Delilah's headstone, his eyes closed, a slight smile on his face. He had died as peacefully as she had, his heart finally giving out, ready to join her. They buried him beside Delilah, and the whole mountain territory came to pay their respects. Thomas spoke at the funeral, his voice breaking with emotion. "My father was the strongest man I ever knew, not just in body but in spirit. He taught us that real strength is in gentleness, in protection, in unwavering devotion. And my mother taught us that tenderness is not weakness, that tears are evidence of a heart that still feels. Together they showed us what love should look like. They built a legacy not of wealth or fame, but of love and family and lives well lived, and that is worth more than all the gold in these mountains. Years passed, and the story of Finn and Delilah Crawford became legend in the mountain territory. People would tell it to their children and grandchildren, the tale of the mountain man who valued a tender heart and the woman who cried easy but loved deeply. Their descendants continued to live in the mountains, carrying forward the values and lessons they had been taught. The cabin stood for many years, maintained by the family as a tribute, until eventually it became a gathering place where the clan would come together to celebrate and remember. And in that meadow where two headstones stood side by side under the shadow of the mountains, wildflowers bloomed every spring, as if the earth itself was honoring the love that had transformed so many lives. The legacy Finn and Delilah left was not measured in material wealth or grand achievements. It was measured in the children they raised, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their lessons forward, the love they had shared, and the example they had set. They had proven that a tender heart was a gift, that strength came in many forms, and that true love, the kind that sees and values another person completely, could create something that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. In the end, what mattered most was not that Delilah cried easily or that Finn was strong. What mattered was that they had found each other, that they had built a life together based on love and mutual respect, and that they had shown everyone around them what it meant to truly cherish another person. Their love story became a beacon, a reminder that in a hard world, tenderness and truth and devotion still mattered. They always would. And so, in a meadow in the mountains of Oregon, under an endless sky, the story of Finn and Delilah Crawford lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the enduring power of love and the beauty of a tender, true heart.